Good morning, everyone. Happy New Year. Hope everyone's enjoying the year of 2024 so far. I wanted to say thank you so much for keeping sort of on board with me as I go through this transition. I want to say the year of 2024 is a very important year. It's the year of the dragon, as most of us know. There's going to be lots of changes. But first and foremost, I want to say that I'm redoing this, and I want to call this the casual Sunday podcast, where I talk about new space, life, and everything and anything that you guys want me to talk about. Firstly, I want to say this first post for 2024 is actually inspired by another fellow lawyer, and in fact, they asked me questions that I couldn't help but smile and think. I've been asked so many times, it's high time I do a podcast on this. So here we go. So there's a few questions that they've asked me, and one of them includes, how does one get into space as a lawyer? So I suppose I can use my own example. I studied law, I practiced as a litigator before moving into corporate and then in-house. And one of the things about doing space is I actually went through a crisis point in my life where I started thinking, you know what, I can do litigation for the rest of my life. And the impact of that would be one court case a day. However, I rethought about that and I thought, well, what if that wasn't the case? What if I lived a life where, regardless of who I encountered with, how I encountered them, I was able to positively impact them? So then I applied and I got selected to the Singularity University's Global Solutions Program, which is funded by NASA, Google, sorry, but based in NASA Ames in Silicon Valley. And it was in that moment, for those few months, that I was able to co-found a satellite propulsion startup from scratch and also see its demise in the journey of being an entrepreneur. I had a lot of life lessons there, and that's what inspired me to found Newspace 2016. It's an appreciation of the challenges that entrepreneurs face when they embark on entrepreneurship, legal and otherwise, and also understanding that as individuals we have a lot of blockages. And those blockages, partly our own, partly perceived, and how we can overcome it. So anyway, I then got the opportunity to do a fellowship at the EU Japan Centre, funded by the European Commission and also the Ministry of Economy and Trade. And the question really was, how does one double a space sector? This was in the context of Japan in 2018. I was tasked to draft a policy paper. I ended up doing a magazine. And how I went about that was I had the opportunity to engage with stakeholders, startups, policymakers, entrepreneurs, academics, you name it. And what was really surprising for me was the reaction that people had when it came to space, how amazing and wonderful it is. And then when you start digging deeply and engage with people, particularly young entrepreneurs, how they could get involved, they back off. It's almost a slight contradiction right there with New Space. And then, of course, I went off to work with European startups. I was able to do tours. And then I had the opportunity to go to the Middle East and to work in reinsurance of rocket launchers and satellites. And things just evolved. I got involved with the International Astronautical Federation. I then joined as a board member for the International Institute of Space Law. And I like to say everything else is pretty much history because once you get involved, it is like any other work. It's the spectacular side of it, of course, exists. You'll never basically lose the interest whenever you see another space launch. But I think the idea behind it is become normalizes. So, what is a space lawyer? So, what does a space lawyer do? So, coming to that original point, it might be the case that you're a student and you're just, embarking on your journey of law. You're trying to explore what field you're interested in. Or you might be a seasoned commercial lawyer, banking lawyer, family lawyer. And I want to acknowledge that I had one Japanese family lawyer at that time that really inspired me as well. when he asked me the question, I'm very interested in space, how do I get involved? And I said, so what area of practice do you do? And he said, family law. So I said, hey, guess what? You can be the first family space lawyer. Of course, the difference is rather than looking at Japanese laws, you actually have to think about the outer space and the scenarios and the possible case studies. But I think the wonderful thing about space law, if anyone is interested in this, is it's not just a field on its own. Yes, there are elements. You're thinking of the sciences, you're thinking of, sort of matters that may be totally out of space. But what I'm trying to say is, if it's commercial contract, that is definitely, I would say, part of space law, because if you think about in the future or even today, where contracts are signed between parties, you need contracts, right? Albeit negligence. When you think about, future human space flight, what are the implications there? You think of goods and services, right? You think of tourism. You think of sales and goods. So I think there is a whole scope. One of the biggest resistance I've had in my experience of being a space lawyer is engaging other lawyers. So if, for instance, this post is able to provide some insight that there's nothing to resist, actually, it's just we are creating an ecosystem. What we need is just critical mass of people understanding that they have a role to play. It's a question of time, then they will jump on board. I can use the example of autonomous shipping. When I was first working in looking at regulations of autonomous vessels, I remember traveling to all the top shipbuilding countries in Asia, you name it, Japan, South Korea, China. Their minds were not at it. The concerns were in building ships and selling ships. But when you get to the point of realizing actually there is something to autonomy and there's something to autonomous vessels, that if we don't do something, we'll lag behind. They actually excelled, particularly South Korea. Third thing is, why the Middle East? That is actually a really good question. So I like to frame that I really didn't choose space and space chose me, and same with the Middle East. I was just very fortunate to be offered a role in looking at reinsurance on rocket launches and satellites, and that really, I have to be grateful to them, sort of put me on the right path in terms of commercial space. I did for a very long period of my time work with space startups from Australia to America, Asia, from grassroots, nothing, i.e. zero, just an idea, to seeing them, become successfully fundraised startups, to see startups that pivot and change and, go into other fields, which is also wonderful. For all those that are interested, I would say join Space Generation Advisory Council. There's a Law and Policy Committee, which is where I started. And I want to say the Middle East is a thriving destination right now for space. And if you were to ask me why, I'll give you an honest answer. It's like being the underdog. You're not the original key space players. You're trying to play catch up. But the inspiration and the leadership is what makes it so great and so wonderful that it is really quite incredible. And so what I would say is the Middle East is a hub, and it will continue to be because it's really fought above its weight. Despite what people think, despite the challenges that it has, I think for me the Middle East is one of the most aspirational, inspiring, wonderful places to be if you are a budding new space entrepreneur. And the reason why I'm saying it like this is from first-hand experience. I had the opportunity to help the UAE Space Agency review and draft some of its reinsurance laws and also policy on startups. And I want to say that because they're at the forefront of the game and they're so motivated to create a new space industry, that everything they do makes sense. This idea of their immigration policy to, for example, during the expo, hosting a space week, to really having the vision of engaging the youth and also the applicable accelerator programs and also the funding that they give for obviously appropriate startups. So the final question I have is, how does an English qualified lawyer get into space or space law? Now, I want to say it doesn't have to be, whatever your background, you could be coming from India, you could be coming from Hong Kong, you could be coming from so many other jurisdictions. I want to say that if you have interest and courage, you will be able to make it. I want to give the example of how, um, so after the start failed, I got a scholarship to study at the European Space Agency. And I asked myself that same question. I asked myself, how does a lawyer get involved in space and actually add real contribution, you know? I remember sitting in a room, there were about 100 students. This was at the International Space University in the University of Delft Aerospace Department. Of the 96 engineers, I was probably one of 4 lawyers sitting in the room thinking to myself, okay, I'm just going to be like a sponge and I'm just going to absorb everything. But I still haven't quite figured out how does a space lawyer contribute to space until a Korean American space lawyer from NASA stood on stage and talked about his story. And his story was something along these lines. There was a no-name company called SpaceX by a no-name guy called Elon Musk who said he was going to do space cheaper, faster, and better. And at that time, this Korean American lawyer had to propose one of the uh, offers to the management so that they could consider who would basically take the next bid. So he thought, you know, I've got all these seasoned space companies and I've got this newbie that's just come on the block. Why don't I give him a try? So let's just say everything else is history. This lawyer put the name of Elon Musk, SpaceX, the then nobody company, to NASA, and honestly, everything else is history. Elon Musk, SpaceX, has just been such an inspiration. I would say the godfather of new space. Why? It is exactly what new space is all about. New space is not about traditional, conventional space. New space is about having innovative ideas. In other words, you don't have to be a rocket scientist to do space, right? You can be innovative, you can be smart, you can be creative, and whatever you're into, you can do. In my next post, I want to talk about what new space economy actually is all about. So in the meantime, I hope that answers some of your questions, particularly to the space lawyers that are interested or the lawyers that are interested in space. And again, I'm calling this Casual Sundays, so hence the dress and also the way how relaxed I am. So thank you so much for joining me. I'm on Telegram. You can join me at Newspace 2060. You can, in the week, if you've got any burning questions, just let me know. And every Casual Sunday, for the time being at least, I will post and answer your questions. Thank you and have a lovely day.